Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell.
So I have to admit that sometimes presenters do a clever title just to kind of hook you in and get your interest. In this case, there really is a true story behind the title of my talk. Everything that I learned in user experience design, I learned while at a hotel. Do you guys need some help? I'm happy to, actually. Thank you. No. Here you go.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So the story begins really like this. So years ago, sort of in the heady romantic days of before mortgages and before kids, this is a picture of my wife. And so I was carrying on a long distance relationship with my lovely wife, not wife at the time, but she was living and working in LA, and I was up here in Seattle. But we would always have these like romantic rendezvous in exotic, kind of cool, very stylish hotels. And we would be there, and it was really kind of the happiest time of my life. And I would feel very, very sort of soothed and happy and tranquil. And I was always relaxed no matter what happened. And I began to wonder, why can't software or UX design also make me feel this way, right? And I'm reminded of sort of back in the 80s, Trip Hawkins, who was the CEO of Electronic Arts, used to buy full-page ads in Byte magazine. That dates me. Do you guys raise your hand if you've heard of Byte magazine, right? Right. So he would have these ads, can a computer make you cry? And that was a very good brand positioning for Electronic Arts, who obviously went on to create a lot of really wonderful games that were emotionally resonant with their users. And so years later, at around 2005, when I sold my first company to Google, I was being interviewed by Marissa Mayer. I ended up reporting to Marissa after the acquisition. But as it turns out, when Google buys your company, they sort of want to know that you sort of have to pass a sniff test. They want to know that the CEO of this company is going to be a good Googler, right? So she started interviewing me and asking me all kinds of tough questions about, like, what kinds of products are you into and what do you derive design inspiration from? And the typical answer to those questions when you're at a Google interview are, well, you know, I really like the movie recommendation engine in Netflix, you know, I really admire what Apple is doing in this area and with iTunes. But what I said was, I draw design inspiration from the lobby of the Mondrian Hotel in LA. So that definitely raised an eyebrow with her, and I went on to make the following argument. Why design matters, and why actually these things are really, at the end of the day, transformative to the way that you behave when you're sitting in front of a product. So great design is transformative. Imagine for a second that you lived in that space. So it's a beautiful space, right? You might want to, it's very content rich with stuff. There's a lot of stimuli. There's a nice leather couch. You might have some slippers and like a nice woolly cardigan. You might want to build a fire, curl up on a couch with your dog, and just sort of have the security of knowing that you're not at a loss for things to do. You can always pull an interesting book off the shelf and be enriched by that in some way. Very beautiful space. Contrast that with this space. Now, how might you live differently here, right? Well, you may not have that dog, right? It's going to get too much hair all over everywhere or something like that. You probably don't even want to forget about a bunch of books, but maybe not even like a cookie crumb would you actually leave anywhere at this house. So you would live very, very differently, despite the fact that they're both equally well designed. And that also applies to what we do in software. So the experience, I couldn't get somebody's permission in time to use their Facebook profile, so I had to use mine. But the point here is that the user behavior is going to be very different on the left versus what you see on the right. And a lot of us, when traffic for traffic for MySpace was declining, at the same time traffic for Facebook was on the increase. A lot of us who cared about user experience had this hypothesis, which was that perhaps in enforcing a certain kind of uniformity in people's identities and providing a much more organized and less chaotic framework for how you expressed your persona, that what was happening was that people felt more comfortable. And it was a more soothsome experience, and it didn't become this sort of more cluttered, sort of meat market-ish thing that you saw in MySpace during the latter years. So I'm going to quote Don Norman a lot, and he is a fascinating, yeah, we got some Don Norman fans, all right. So a senior fellow at Apple, master sort of UX architect and computer scientist, and he's written a number of books, but in one of them about emotional design, which is really what we're talking about today. When people are in a relaxed situation, the pleasant, pleasurable aspects of design will make them more tolerant of difficulties and problems in the interface, right? So in other words, if your product is attractive, people are gonna, they'll give you a little bit more rope on stuff, right? They might withstand a little bit longer load times. They might withstand a little less polish in other areas or some bugginess. Optimally, you don't want to have a lot of those other things, but they can withstand those. So there's a very practical reason why design is very important to your startup. One is that it begets greater press. So people who are out there, I saw some PR folks amidst the audience, they will tell you that after you have that desk side briefing with Walt Mossberg and you've pitched them on why your startup is awesome, and you've met with Harry McCracken at Time Magazine, and you've talked with John Cook and Todd Bishop of GeekWire, really, what are the other stories, right? There's only so much they're going to write about you. But if your product is beautiful, it opens up another probably 7 or 8x number of publications and universe of people who will talk and blog about you, right? So one of my products actually won ID Magazine's Best Design of the Year award, and the other co-winners, or the previous winners, were the iPhone and the and actually the Olympic Sculpture Park here in Seattle. We were also on the Martha Stewart show, this one with Picnic, which no longer exists, unfortunately, but it's a good example that underscores the fact that if you're a beautiful product, people whose job it is to talk to other people about aesthetics and beautiful things, they're going to want to talk about you, and that's an important thing. So designing your product beautifully will create more stories and get you more press. But most importantly, and this goes back to the Don Norman emotional design stuff, a beautiful product will engender greater user loyalty. And that look in that woman's face is just, it's fantastic. That's really what you're going for, is that user delight, that wow factor of somebody saying, man, this product has a lot of utility, but oh boy, is it beautiful and fun and delightful, and am I really pleased by it? So beautiful things really do work better. So that's the book that I referenced. One bit of homework that I would prescribe is that you go and get this book, because I'm thinking that most of you are not actually going to become UX designers, but this will provide a nice background of knowledge for you to understand how to hire a great UX designer for your company. So he talks about 3 tenets of emotional design: visceral, behavioral, and reflective. And I'm actually I would love to write some sort of addendum to his book, because I have a little bit more to add there to those. So visceral design, that's the quickest thing that gets across. When somebody first looks at your product, this is all the tangible stuff, the physical stuff, what the product looks like, what it feels like, what it smells like, if it has a smell. And people actually, there's a lot of psychology here where people make the purchase decision oftentimes just based on what happens here on the level of visceral design, right? And all other things are kind of afterthoughts. So the canonical example of great visceral design, in my opinion, is a 1961 Jaguar E-Type. If there's someone on this planet who thinks that this car is an ugly car, I have not met that person, right? This is a gorgeous, gorgeous automobile. Everyone can agree on that. They came to a great design here. So the key thing is that a lot of people will look at this and they'll make a decision, I want to go to there. But they don't think about, oh, wait, we live in Seattle, and will this car even start on those rainy mornings, and how much does it cost? And oh, wait, I have a 3-year-old. Car seat's never going to fit into that. So, but you have to execute well on visceral design. Unfortunately, these days in the world of UX and UI design, people have sort of bifurcated into 2 different camps, right? And it's also age dependent. Most UI designers over the age of, I would say, 30 can really do both of these things: visceral design and behavioral design, and also reflective design. Nowadays, people have to sort of pick 1 or 2 tracks. They either become visual designers and they index very highly on the visceral side, or they become information architects and they index higher on the next one, which is behavioral design. As you can guess, behavioral design is all about how things function, how they work, the utility of things, how fast it accomplishes the thing that you want it to accomplish. And I think the canonical design of great behavioral design, to their credit, would be a company like Google. In fact, I would say that they're sort of almost like 100% behavioral design and 0% some of the other stuff. And the fact that their products are so functional and successful and devoid of the visceral stuff and the reflective aspects either means that Google is a gigantic sort of glitch in the matrix, or that Don Norman and myself maybe overemphasize that you need to have all three. That sometimes I think if you have the right business levers to pull, that you can also just win on great behavioral or functional design. So reflective design, that one is actually the hardest one to sort of explain. It's also the hardest one for your product to get right, because your product actually has to be fairly mature with a lot of users and a certain set of brand values that are already associated with your product before you can even get to this point. And reflective design is really, as the word indicates, what the product reflects about the user, the person that's using it, right? So in a way, if I carry a certain kind of wallet or handbag, what does that say about me? And what does that state implicitly about my values when somebody sees me? The flip side of that is that it's really designed as avatar. Right. There are all kinds of values that we associate with these objects, with the kind of person that drives that car or has that phone versus another phone, or lives in a house like that versus another house. Some of these associations may be positive. I think the person who is consuming these products and buying these products wants them to be positive associations, but maybe sometimes they're not so positive associations, right? So, but it's designed as avatar. That's really that kind of the concept behind reflective design. Now, I like to flip that on its head. Instead of saying, what does the product say about the user in reflective design, when it comes to software, web surfaces, web apps, I think it's also important to really sort of turn this upside down. And that is, what do you want people to say about the product when you're designing it? So I'm just taking a case study. Picnic is a convenient example of this. Just as a, this is what the UI looked like. And I think right now, to me, it looks a little dated. But at the time, it was considered a very beautiful interface and sort of very groundbreaking in terms of how soothsome everything was. The very first versions of Picnic, when we started the company, looked nothing like this. They looked really boring. They looked really, it was almost like the web app equivalent of the black leather couch. It looked like just a bunch of guys did it, right? And it wasn't fun, it wasn't delightful. I got the whole team into a room, and it takes, sometimes engineers and product people, it takes them a while to understand how to do this, right? They get really literal. I said, okay, guys, what do we want people to say about the product? And don't talk about the features. Don't talk about the functionality of the product. Don't talk about what you want the back-of-the-box sales bullets are, the value proposition. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about simple, high-level, sort of emotional words. And so these are the actual words. We actually ended up having this meeting about 3 times before we kind of got into the groove of things and people kind of understood what we were doing. But these were the actual words that people said that they wish that, I would be proud if I worked on a product that somebody said was friendly or was easy. And some people might say, I want my product to feel kind of irreverent and delightful, to kind of make people smile and make people laugh a little bit. Smooth, fun, non-corporate, small. Those are all the words that we gathered up, and this was sort of like the favorites, right? We had actually probably 2 or 3x this list of words. So then we started mood boarding. So then does this look familiar? I'm going back to the whole hotels experience, where what are some images that make me feel that way, right? So this is, I think, the Sky Bar at the Mondrian. And feels like a breath of fresh air. Feels open, clean, right? Friendly, very soothsome, delightful, sense of whimsy, sense of humor, solid and smooth, well-designed, evoking of childhood memories. That was another one that came up in the case of Picnic, right? Remind people what it's like to be a kid again, to be at a picnic. So that was a very important exercise for us to go through, and we ended up with an interface that, no accident that it ended up looking like this. So, okay, now, Don Norman would say, and I would agree with him, that you have to actually execute on all three. And I would argue that those of us who work in a software space, we're really not, unlike folks in industrial design or in car design, we're not quite, you're generally not quite as sophisticated on all three of these things. And I think that you can, to the victor to spoils, you can win in a big way if you execute on all three of these things. So some examples of, I think, web products that I feel like execute very well on all three of these things. And I don't know these guys, and I will fully disclose that if I do know them. So this is 500px, which is a great, gorgeous photos consumption experience. Raise your hand. Who knows about these guys? Yeah, good. Yeah, so beautiful, beautiful product. It executes on the visceral, on the behavioral, and on a reflective. You're sort of amongst this community. You're like cool if you use this product, right? Minimeteo is another one. They're like they actually have a series of iPad apps. This one happens to be their weather one, and it's beautiful in the way that you can just quickly at a glance tell, just based on the color of those large chips, the weather. Right, whether it's rainy or sunny, right? The yellow chips are sunny. They take full advantage of the iPad space and make everything else disappear. It's beautifully done. In full disclosure, I'm an investor in this one. Visify highly executes on the reflective, right? Really makes you feel like this is who I am if I use this product. In addition to the fact that behavioral-wise, in terms of the functionality, it's absolutely excellent, and viscerally, it's also very interesting to look at, right? So, but wait, there's more. I'll have to go a little bit quick because I'm starting to run low on time. But I believe also in creating some alchemy. If you define alchemy as the classic definition of where you take two lesser things or two things that aren't really meant to be together and you put them together, they create a contrast or a tension that's interesting, right? So that's a great example of that. And these things tend to be fairly controversial when they appear on the scene. And a lot of naysayers, and then over time, they sort of grow on you, right? And this, we can't imagine. I'm old enough to remember when that happened and how controversial that design was. And now I can't ever picture the Louvre without the IMP pyramid. In 1958, they thought this was a spaceship that landed on the Earth. So again, very controversial design. And now, many decades after the fact, this happens to be one of the most expensive collectible cars, outpacing by a 5x margin the same car from that era that also has the same performance specs, et cetera, just because of those darn doors. Here's another more recent example there. Vacuum tubes on a brand new audio tuner. So how about that? I mean, what was Clinton's term? It takes brass to, take some brass to put vacuum tubes on a brand new hi-fi audio piece of equipment. So second to the last point I want to make is that the details add up. And Charles Ames, one of my, also a favorite designer of mine, has said the details are really not the details. They actually make the design. Again, convenient for me to use Picnic as an example because we had a lot of these details. If you bought the premium service, you'd get like a little sun that appeared on the product. We made things as tactile and 3D as possible, so you felt a sense of accomplishment when you clicked on a button. You felt sort of like, much more of a solid connection with the product. Our loading bar had little things on it, like buttering sandwiches, just to make those 4 or 5 seconds go by with a little bit more whimsy and delight. Buttering sandwiches, releasing butterflies, laying down picnic basket or blanket, a lot better than what our competitor was doing. It says initializing, right? Initializing, no, not as fun, right? When you created an account on most websites, that is a really boring exercise, right? Watch what happens when you create an account here. Dandelions appear. Well, that's kind of delightful. And then watch what happens if you uncheck email me. Oh, sad. We take a dandelion away. So little things matter. Little things matter, right? Surprise people. Reward people. Bruce Shelley, who was a great game designer, I had the pleasure of working with him on Age of Empires and some of the other games after that when I was in the games group at Microsoft. He said, he once took me aside and he actually just boiled it down. I've never really kind of had a moment like this since, really. He said, you know what, Jonathan? All this is, the reason why Age of Empires is so addictive is because I'm constantly, as a game designer, just giving users a set of interesting decisions to make at every turn. And when they make any interesting decision, they get an ROI on that. It pays off in some way. So here's another example of where when somebody buys a premium version of Picnic, what happens is that they're delighted with a bunch of balloons. A bouquet of balloons goes off. And we had people write into us to say, oh my God, I didn't realize that it made an audio cue, that there was clapping, and that there was like a ta-da, when I bought premium. Well, guess what? There actually wasn't any audio. They heard that in their own heads. They imagined it because the effect was actually so powerful. So lastly, I know that my time's up. I just want to emphasize that design is important. Think about Don Norman. Think about the combination of visceral design, behavioral design, and reflective design, which is the hardest to do. And it'll pay off for you, right? Because at the end of the day, who would you rather be? This guy or that guy, right? So design matters.
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place.